Kuphi nakuphi emakhaya amadolobheni aseCounselling khona sakumukela kembukeli sikwamukele futhi sicephini saleli viki selihlelo lakho ilungelo lakho it's your right luhlelo kwelelo kulethela kathi indzaba letebathengi lethisematheni khumbula ukuthi umthetho wanga 2008 babukeli iNational Credit Act wabeka emthethweni luhlelo ke le debt review lekuhlangulula abathengi etikwenetini kepha ke emva kokuhamba kwesikhathi sekuyacaca ukuthi ngathi ke lo hlelo aluhambi kahle ngoba ke labanyendi bathengi ke labalungenele lo hlelo bathi khanza bathe shika elubishini mina ke ngisimpiwe ngcongwane kanti kileli ilungelo lakho asingene endzabeni yethu namhla Simo somnotho lesintengantengako ke lesidalwe yi-COVID-19 sesibangele umjago wokungenela i-debt review kwebathengi ke labangakwadi kumelana netikweneti tabo kepha ke labanye abathengi ke lesekukade bayingenela ke i-debt review bafuna kuphuma ngendzaba yekungakwadi kumelana nemigomo nembandzela yayo kepha ke ngekwenta njalo uthola ukuthi sebadonsela emandi ngemsele so kumele ke kungena kwe-debt review and more people since the economic depression imposed by COVID-19 are struggling consumers and they're joining the debt review program as they're struggling to meet with their financial want out because of the conditions that it imposes and of course the lack of awareness of how the program operates and others are doing as they wish without a court order and hence exposing themselves to the legal processes but it wasela ke isandla semthetho manje ukhuluma kabanti ke ngelihlelo ke le debt review nekuthi ke isebenza kanjani asamukele tivakashi tethu joining us now via Skype is Neil Roots from Debt Rescue also joining us from the National Credit Regulator is Madiko Poshoko. Neil, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Sampiwe. Thank you very much.
All right, for purposes of adding clarity and context into this conversation, let's start about, dissecting what debt review is and what necessitates one to join this program.
Well, first of all, what debt counselling is, it's a process that's been introduced by the National Credit Act about 13 years ago. And what it entails is it's there to help people who are over-indebted to do the responsible thing and pay back their credit providers the money that's due to them, but in an affordable way. And it also provides protection to the consumers in paying back this money in an affordable way. So basically what debt counsellors do in this process is assess the situation, the financial situation of the client, look at the client's income and also the client's expenses on a monthly basis. If the expenses on a monthly basis is more than the income of the client, it means that the client is over indebted and that client can be placed under debt review. Now, what we then do by placing the client under debt review is we look at the expenses and distinguish between the payments towards the credit providers and then also the payments towards living expenses. Now, your living expenses includes payments towards things like rent, food, water and electricity, insurance, all these kind of things that you need on a monthly basis to get by. And then your credit installments are payments that you make towards loans like short-term loans and also unsecured debt, your credit cards, your store cards, and these kind of things. And it also includes payments towards vehicle finance and home loans. Now, these payments toward your credit providers, we are then, in terms of the National Credit Act, empowered to lower those installments to a point where the consumer can actually afford to pay that back and still have enough money to pay for all the living expenses, so that they had come out at the end of the day, have enough money to pay everybody, and they are also protected against their credit providers who can then not just take legal action against them.
And often it's confused with debt counselling. So what is debt counselling juxtaposed with debt review?
Well, Sampiwe, it's actually the same thing. It's just different terminology, but it's the same thing. It's debt counselling and debt review is the same thing. Now, a lot of the times we see that people confuse debt counselling with a process whereby you sit and counsel with a client, and it's a process where you just comfort the client. And that's not the case. Debt counselling or debt review, as it's called as well, it's a legal process, and it operates in terms of the National Credit Act, and it provides you with proper legal protection. In fact, how the process works is that after we've determined your repayment plan, which will now be affordable to you, we will go to court and apply to make this new repayment plan an order of court, therefore affording you all the protection that you need. So it's not just counseling, it's a legal process there to enable consumers to pay back their money in a responsible way and also in an affordable way, but also giving them protection against their credit providers to make sure that they sustain this process.
All right, Neil, there's so many unanswered questions, so I'm going to ask you to stay on the line so you can help us with those questions. In the meantime, let me also bring into the conversation Madigwa from the National Debt Regulator, NCR. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. How are you, and to your viewers?
We are so great, and we appreciate you joining us this hour. Let's talk about who gets into debt review and why. I mean, what necessitates people to get into this program?
So, a debt review, normally you join a debt review because struggling with your debts. I'll call you month to month. So you want to seek assistance before your credit providers bathathe legal action against you. Bathatha amanyathelo ukuthi bagise enkantolo and then start garnishing or having an AOU against you. So it's a measure that is available for ama consumer who feel ukuthi ikweleti zabo abasakhona ukuthi makaqeda ukubhadala ikweleti kusala imali for instance, or you find ukuthi mawuthengile endlini ikweleti awukhona ukubhadala, or uyabona ukuthi in the next few months maybe ngizoba nengxaki yokuthi I would not be able to pay ama creditors wami as per e-contracting ngisayinile. So that's when you would consider a debt review, which maybe is an option yokuthi ngakhona ukubhadala without everybody coming at once. Kube nomuntu oncedayo, negotiator now on credit providers at the same time in a fair way, and that is actually protected by repairs.
So asasikhuluma ngema processes engenela i-debt review ukuthi is it mandatory or is it voluntary? Ingabe ngingayijoyina le program ngekuthanza kwami noma vele ngiphocelelekile ukuthi ngijoyine nabe ke tikwenete setangekhama?
No, it's a voluntary process because ayekho umuntu ozazi ikweleti zakho besides you. So ubona ukuthi angisakhona manje ukuthi ngiqhubeke nale ikweleti, and then you go find help. So it's a voluntary process where wena uyaphakama uthi cha mayese ngingingaki uthi ngibona ukuthi ngingancedakala kanjani, hayi ukuthi abantu bakufonele bakuthele ukuthi nenkinga, abazazelaphi inkinga zakho ungakabatsheli ukuthi nenkinga zekweleti.
Ingaba ngeke bese sekuyayinweba le repayment period ithatha isikhathi lesithe ngenzaba ukuthi ke ema installment amphela sekehlile, but ke in that process uthola ukuthi I'm attracting even a much higher interest which will be payable over a longer period of time.
So what happens now, apply for debt review, they will look at ikweleti zakho ukuthi how much do you owe each credit provider. The credit provider will obviously give them the updated balances. Nokuthi usalele emuva na, do you have arrears on that account? And then based on the information that you provide versus ama expenses wakho endlini, babheke ne-income yakho, then they should be able to come up with a proposal to the credit providers yokuthi cela ukunciphisa installment yebo, but the debt counselor will also try and make sure ukuthi where possible baya-negotiate nama credit providers ukuthi bayehlise i-interest. The period will be extended, yes, because you're paying less. Where possible, the credit providers will probably also try and reduce the interest. Which it's also actually covering the interest so that it's not like upatala less than the interest. So it's a matter of balancing the two to make sure with anything you've got enough, but our credit providers are also getting what they can from you based on what you can afford, and it doesn't make a bad situation worse.
Okay, asibambe lapho ke Madigwa sitawuqhubeka nenkulumo yethu ke emva kwaleli khefu, and we'll also join you Neil Roots, so please stay on the line. We'll certainly pick up on this conversation after the break. Ngabe ke ucaza usijoyina ke babukele sikhuluma nge-debt review nekuthi ke kuyangani ukuthi uyijoyine nekuthi ngibani longayijoyina le debt review, and we've seen some people opting out or wanting to opt out of this debt review ngoba ke bathi ke seyabakhama. So we'll be discussing all these and other issues. So sicela ukuthi nisishayele licingo on the numbers on the screens right now, 0117146918 noma ke 0117146919. Asasisishiyelele ngasetolo leli Yilungelo Lakho. Siyabuya khona ngala.
How
Asitemukele futhi-ke babukeli ehlelweni Yilungelo Lakho. Namhla-ke sikhuluma ngehlelo le-debt review ukuthi kumele ukuthi ikuswide kanjani nekuthi kumele wente ini ngayo. Our studio lines are now open. Please take that phone and call the numbers on your screens right now. There we go. 0117146918 noma-ke 0117146919. You can also email your thoughts about this program to consumer@sabc.co.za. Ungaphinde uthole futhi na ku-Facebook-ke. Tinitefu-ke namhla sina Nail Roots ulapha kwe-Debt Rescue na Matikwa Poshoko ulapha-ke National Credit Regulator. Now, Neil, let me bring you into this conversation. It's almost 20 years since debt review was introduced, but it does appear like, the debt counselors, I beg your pardon, are the cheerleaders of this actual program and not the actual consumers which it is targeted at.
Yes, beware. I would not say that the debt counsellors are the cheerleaders. The way the process works is that debt counsellors are actually independent functionaries of court, acting in the best interest of the consumers and the credit providers. Now, unfortunately, what would have been ideal is that government make people aware of this thing called debt counselling. And inform people that debt counselling can help them, because not only can it help the consumers out there, but it also helps the credit providers. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that from government. We're not seeing that there are enough campaigns out there making people aware of debt counselling. So yes, as the debt counsellors, we do not have a choice but to make people aware from our side. And to do that work from our side, and yes, we're succeeding in that, and we're getting the message out there, but it's difficult because we have to reach the whole country. And now, especially because of the fact that we've been through this difficult time of lockdown and COVID and so on, there's so many people who are struggling. There's millions of people who are struggling, and they can benefit from debt counselling. But they do not know about the process, or they don't know how it works because they haven't learned about it yet. So it is a struggle to get the word out to everybody, and it would be brilliant if government would implement campaigns, awareness campaigns, so that people can be made aware of the advantages of debt counselling. And then when people do go under debt review or debt counselling, remember, it's there to help them. So it's not a matter of who the cheerleaders are, but it's all about whether people can be helped or not. And people can certainly be helped through this brilliant piece of legislation, which was introduced by government years ago already. It's just a shame that not enough people know about it, but people can definitely be helped through it.
But Neil, doesn't debt review elongate the repayment period? For instance, if I've got a debt payable over 36 months, but then because of debt review, the installments are lowered, and if the installments are lowered, surely the repayment period will be much longer and will attract a much higher interest. And I find myself in a worse off position that I was before debt review.
Well, Simpiwe, you're 100% right. In order to lower the installments, you have to extend the repayment period. There's no other way of doing that. But you're not right in saying that it would attract higher interest rates. In fact, in many cases, we are able to reduce the interest rates payable towards credit providers. At the end of the day, will you pay back more money in total to your credit providers? Yes, because you're paying it off over a longer period of time. But when does that consumer need the help? Is it now, or is it in 5 or 10 years' time when he's paid off his debt? The reality is that those people need the relief now. So the only way that we can give them the relief is to lower the installment towards the credit providers, but we must also be fair towards the credit providers, and we cannot force them to write off debt. So yes, the debt has to be paid back, but the process just brings relief and make it more possible to pay back that debt in lowering the installments, but yes, obviously extending the period within which the payments will be paid back.
All right, good point. Thanks for making that point there. Matigod, let me also bring you into this conversation. Nangabe ngiyabona ukuthi ngathi ngene ke ku debt review by mistake and I want to opt out, or can I renegotiate the terms of the debt review in the middle of this program?
Look, ultimately, the consumer is responsible for the debt. So it would be up to them how they want to continue with the program. Firstly, if you can't just opt out once you're in. So when they negotiate with your credit providers, into bayenzayo ukuthi babheka ama-installments wakho, bayenze ama-arrangements nama-credit providers. If you feel ukuthi le mali abayibhadalayo is not enough, then what you would do would say, okay, mina senginemali extra u-500 ngicela ukufaka bakhona uku-distribute to the credit providers, because i-debt review mawungena, it's a binding contract etry to protect wena as a consumer njengoba usasogola. As soon as you opt out of the program, you find ukuthi sometimes the contract that you signed say pelile. So mawuphuma under debt review, areas wakho become due and payable immediately because you go back to the contract able you signed initially and no longer the arrangements that you had made under debt review. So before uphuma under debt review, you would need to be very careful. And nakhona, the Act only actually makes available to uphuma under debt review once you've paid off all the debts that have been placed under debt review. And this all means all the creditors. All the credit providers, to make the process fair, need to be included under debt review. And then you will get a clearance certificate once everybody has been paid up as per our arrangements with debt counselling.
So isn't this program open for abuse? Like multiple streams of income, but meaning declare yinye ngithi ke ngisebenza emsebenzini munye and ngithola ne-income yinye and angisakhoni ukuchubeka nekubhadala netikweneti tami. And I mean, is it open for abuse? And can the debt review personnel pick up those issues?
The program is based on you being honest. So if you're lying, you're only lying to yourself at the end of the day. Because if they reduce the amount it only delays you in the process. And also under debt review, so you're only doing yourself an injustice trying to cheat the system, and you are stuck or you are in the program until uqeda ukubhadala. So you're going to be complaining 2 years down the line, Uguti, they're taking too long. However, the problem was you to start with. You were not honest. Maukala ugenza debt review, trying to get away and trying to pay everybody less. But iyokfikisa at the end of the day. So my consumers need to be honest with themselves as to why they want to go into the program. You can always increase ama installments wakho or mawubona ukuthi le account iyaphela ubhadale more ukhona ukuqeda debt review quicker. But honestly, lying to umuntu okuthaya ukukusiza under debt review is doing an injustice to yourself more than anybody else.
Okay, asishiye lapho esaqhubeka lenkulumo yethu emva kwelekhefu. Ingabe mbukeli uyadi yini ukuthi yini le debt review? Ingabe uyadi yini ukuthi ke ngitiphi ikwenete kumele utifake ku debt review nokuthi ke khona kumele uthi exclude ukuthi ngitiphi leto. Uma sibuya ke kulekhefu sitawuqhubeka letindzaba letinjengaleti. We have on the line Neil Roots from Debt Rescue kanye ke namadikwa Phoshoko loqhamuka ke NCR. Asisibuye letjolo siyabuya khona nyalo. Welcome back. This is your right. Leli ke hlelo Yilungelo Lakho. Khumbula ke bekunene ukuthi incingo tethu tivuliwe ukuthi nawe ungabeka umbono wakho. Sishayele ke licingo ku 0117146918 noma ke 0117146919. Our email address is consumer@sabc.co.za or catch us on our social media platforms. The numbers are on your screens right now. Namhla ke bekunene sikhuluma nge-debt review ukuthi silwane sini le debt review nekuthi ke ngubani longangena ku debt review. Labanye ke bakhala ngekuthi sebafuna kuphuma ngoba letinkinga noma ke imigoma nembandzela yayo le debt review review seyabe khama kuthi ngabe kuyenteka yini lokho singathaza kuva ngawe ukuthi ke iyakusebenzela le debt review namhla ke sinamatiko Phoshoko ulapha ke NCR National Credit Regulator kanye ke na Nil Roots uchamuka inkampani lekuthiwa ke i-Debt Rescue Matikwa. And just before we went to that ad break, I would like us to talk in greater detail about what debt, like do I have a choice, you know, of which debts to include. Nangabe ngiyabona ukuthi ngathi isikweleti sami semoto sikhulu kakhulu ngizihodlela ngala ka debt review kepha ke isikweleti sethe impahla ngibona ngathi sincane ngakhona kusibhadala. So do I have a choice of which debts to include in this program?
No, all your debts must be included. The only debts that will normally be excluded from debt review is where already sebakuthathela amanyathelo in terms of legal action. So uthola ukuthi sebakthumela ama-summons, then those type of accounts cannot be included under debt review. Otherwise, every other account that is credit needs to be included under debt review. What you can do, mabasebayenza, the restructuring part of the process, is that as a consumer, angithi kusase iy'kweleti zakho. So you can say, ngicela ukuthi sitry upusha lesi iy'kweleti zempahla ngoba ama-balance mancane. Can we pay more towards those ukuthi ziphele, or you can make additional payments now as per the proposal, and then ubona ukuthi lezo iy'kweleti ziyaphuma, and then itsala lezi ezingathi ama-balance makhudlwanyana.
Kunemkhutshana ke luthide ke Matikwa siyayisibone ema-debt reviewers bangawubhadali lama creditors. Ingabe lokho mina kungithinta kanjani and kuyangani ukuthi bangakwendi lokho?
Well, I think as a consumer, you still need to be actively involved in the process. Every month, they send you a statement yokuthi babhadale malini, kubani, and how. So when ama-creditors wakho angithi uyawazi mawungena under debt review ukuthi bekubani. So you need to also follow the process. The thing is, most consumers makafika lapha utshela ukuthi yazini akusese inkinga yami le kweleti uyazishiya lapho kuloyo muntu angasayenzi follow up. So you need to be actively involved in the process as a consumer. Ufone ubuza ukuthi ngiyabona ukuthi this month andibhadalanga XYZ. Why is that? Ibalance seyiphelile na, so that they know what you are keeping up to date nge-process yakho nama-account wakho ukuthi kwenzakalani ngazo. Hayi ukuthi relax and then after 2 years only you come and say mara ngathi beningabhadali, whereas nawe uzishiyile. It's still your debt. Kusase imali yakho lo ibhadalayo.
Okay. Now, Neil, being over-indebted is one thing and struggling with my financial commitments is another. So is debt review the only option?
Well, Sampiwe, no, it's not necessarily the only option, but under the circumstances and under specific circumstances, it's definitely the best option. So there are other, let's call it debt remedies available in South Africa. For instance, debt administration. So debt administration has been in South Africa for years now, but it's been a little bit of outdated now with debt counselling. There's a lot of other benefits that debt counselling brings to the process because there's a lot of limitations when it comes to debt administration. For instance, the amount of debt that can be placed under administration is capped at 50,000 Rand. Now, a lot of people have debt more than 50,000 Rand, and therefore they would opt for debt counselling. Also, another remedy that is available for people is sequestration or voluntary sequestration. Now that's a very harsh, let's call it that remedy, which is only used in circumstances where you just have no other alternative to pay back your credit providers, and you don't have any income anymore, and you've received the legal action has been implemented against your credit providers, and there's just no way out. And then basically what happens then is you are declared as being insolvent. And that's also a process that you would not opt for first. And you can do that as a last resort and only if you've lost your income and there's just no way that you can ever pay back your credit providers. But other than that, debt counselling or debt review is definitely the best process out there to help consumers paying back their debt in an affordable way without losing their assets. One thing that is very important to remember, though, is that you need a monthly income in order to be placed under debt review, because at the end of the day, this legislation and this process is there to protect and to assist the consumers, but also the credit providers. So it's in both of their benefits. So it must be sustainable, and it cannot be expected by credit providers to just write off their debt and not get any payments at all. So unfortunately, you need a monthly income to be placed under debt review.
Okay, so say I get into this program and I enter into a contractual agreement or relationship with the creditors and as well as the debt reviewers. So can the creditors, or rather are they at the liberty to accept or reject my request for lower payments?
No, they're actually not at liberty to deny that, because the legislation makes it very clear that the debt counsellor, as the independent functioning of court, determines what that a client can pay and can afford to pay towards his credit providers. So what then happens in the process is, and part of the process is, as a debt counsellors, we will then apply at court to make this new repayment plan an order of court. And yes, sure, the credit providers may oppose that court application and say that, on whichever grounds they want to do that. But then they would have to prove in court that order and why that order should not be granted. And that's going to be very difficult, because the legislation makes it very clear that the debt counsellor determines what a consumer can afford to pay back towards his credit providers. And generally, and in terms of the legislation, the credit providers have to accept that. And then just to add to that, that's why we get the court order, is in order to make sure that the consumer is afforded all the protection that he needs in order to complete this process called debt counselling.
All right, Neil, please hold your thought. Let's take our first caller. Sina Landi from Springs. Sakumula Landi, ehlangene sawubona.
Yebo njani?
Siyaphila kunjani mama?
Siyaphila. Mina umbuzo wami ukuthi I am married in commercial property, and then to the separation, husband, and then waya ku debt review. Ku debt review azange ngisayina ama documents, but namba ngifaka ku debt review. And they are saying, should I file for divorce? Still ngisazoba ku debt review. So I understand this reason.
Okay, great question there, Landi. Our guest will answer you after this break. Sinalo mbuzo futhi Bronco Sprayed. Sakumele lihlele sawubona.
Yebo unjani baba?
Siyaphila kunjani mama?
Ngiyaphila Simphiwe.
Khuluma nathi mama.
Lo mlungu okhuluma naye lapho baba, mina ngimlalele ngela eBronco Street. Because mina ababa credit review bangisukela bangifonela I think about 4 times Simphiwe. Solo ngizama ukuba reject ukuthi no angidingi ukuthi bangibhadalele ikwelete tami ne.
So wena uva ngathi uyakhona lokuthi ibhadala lekwelete athi kwekhami.
Vele bethi ngangisinzi baba, ngiyakhona ukuthi bhadala ikwelete tami. Even ungafonela kwa credit bureau or kwa CR banbani. Alikho igama lami lapha, but they hold my name. Babamba igama lami kabuhlungu, abangibhadaleli lutho, mina ngiyazibhadalela, angithi dami lesikwelete. Angifuni ukubhadalelwa ngabo, and ngifuna ukuthi basuse leli gama lami lapha, laba ngifake khona balimate ibhizinisi yami kakhulu labantu laba Simphiwe.
Okay maka siyabonga kakhulu kusishayela maka sicela ukuthi ubukele ke mabona kudze wakho timpendulo kutatfola ke khona lapho emva kwaleli khefu. But for now let's take another ad break. Hlala nasi ke babukele unganyakati leli lungelo lakho. Sanamukela futhi bekubene ehlelweni Yilungelo Lakho, it's your right. Ihlelo ke licacisa kanzaba bathengi letsematheni ngenamhla. Our participation lines are 0117146918 noma ke 0117146919. Please Thatha lelo cingo-ke usishayele. Alternatively, you can catch us on our various social media platforms, in particular Facebook. We've had very interesting comments or concerns from our viewers out there about this particular subject. So if you just joined us, namhlanje sikhuluma nge-debt review, nekuthi yini debt review, nekuthi ungangena kanjani ku-debt review, nekuthi-ke yini okukuphocelela ukuthi ungene ku-debt review, nekuthi-ke if uva ngathi awusakhoni, ungakhona yini ukuphuma ku-debt review. Sina Neil Roots from Debt Rescue, sina Matiko Pushoko, uqhamuka yena lapha National Credit Regulator, NCR, and we'll chat to Matiko in just a moment. But for now, Neil, before we went to that ad break, we've had two callers. One caller talked about the fact that she's married in community of property with her husband, and her husband got into debt review. But so as a result of her, marital arrangement with her husband, she was automatically forced to get into debt review. Is this legal, though?
Yes, and beware, it's 100% legal. That's the way it's supposed to be. And that's why it's always very important when people do get married to consider to rather get an antenuptial contract, which will enable them to be married out of community of property. The reason for that is whenever you get into any large transaction, you are seen by law as one person. For instance, when you buy a house and you get a home loan from the bank, if you are married in community of property, because you are seen as one person, both of you have to apply for that home loan, and both of you will be owners of that home. And the same goes for debt counseling or debt review. If you are placed under debt review because of the fact that the debt is actually owned by both the spouses together, both of them will have to be placed under debt review, and that is the law. In fact, if it has been done in any other way, that would have been illegal. So unfortunately, both of them have to be placed under debt review because of the fact that they are married in community of property.
Okay, we've also had another caller who said that her name has been, placed in the red, but she feels that she can afford to pay all her payments, but then these debt review people keep on pestering her and calling her and enticing her to get onto the debt review program. Is this proper? Is this a proper way of dealing with this?
Well, I'm not 100% sure whether she has been placed under debt review at any stage or not. But let's just deal with both scenarios. Let's say she's never been under debt review, and now she's being called by debt counselors all the time, to be placed under debt review. It's not a good thing, and not the National Credit Act, rather the Consumer Protection Act protects you against that, and direct marketing. Credit providers or debt counselors or any service provider cannot just make these unsolicited calls and try and entice you to do a certain thing if you do not want to do that. So you are protected if you eventually take up the process because of a direct marketer, if I can put it that way. But we see that in all kinds of industries. We see credit providers pestering people because they want them to take up credit that they do not even need. So that also happens. But then if the client was placed under debt review, and I don't know whether that was the case, if she has been placed under debt review and now she can afford to pay her credit providers and now she's still under debt review. If that is the case, then what we have to do here is a client that wants to exit debt review, but she still is under debt review, and she feels like because of the fact that she can now afford to pay back her credit providers herself, she should not be under debt review. But it's not always that simple. You cannot just leave the process and say, all right, now I'm done with it, I can afford it again, now I'm just going to walk away. It doesn't work that way. So there are certain criteria in terms of which you can exit the debt review process, and those criteria is if you have obtained a court order as yet at that time, then you need to pay off certain credit providers and get a clearance certificate to exit the process. But if you haven't received a court order, there's other processes. So it all depends on where she is at in the process, if she had applied for debt review before.
All right, a point taken there, Neil. Now, Matigwa, we've had a caller here, and just picking up on what Neil has just said, uthi ke bayamshayela labantu be-debt review bafuna ukuthi angene ngenkani lapha ku-debt review ngoba ligama lakhe balifakile khona lapha in the red, and yena akathi ukuthi bamfake njani lapha ngoba yena uyakhona ukuthi ibhadalela tikweneti. So ingabe leyo indzaba lesingayisolva sithini? And I suppose it highlights the issue of unscrupulous and dodgy debt collectors, and consumers find themselves so vulnerable ukuthi vele they can fall for their tricks. Kuthi ke ingabe ngamsita kanjani ke nombuso kulelo hlangothi?
Well, she would need to send through a complaint VT, and then we'd have to investigate ukuthi kahle kahle kwenzakale kanjani ukuthi abe placed under debt review, if we under debt review, and then if it's just a credit bureau listing, we would also need to understand ukuthi what kind of a listing is it, and esingamsita kanjani. If ama account wakhe wonke are up to date, it doesn't make sense that igama lakhe has been adversely listed ukuthi angasakhona ukuthola i-credit the way bekakhona ngakhona. So it's a matter of her just sending us a complaint, and then we'll investigate the matter and look ukuthi inkinga kahle kahle ikuphi. And then with the lady who was married in community of property, Neil was right. You actually both need to be under debt review. But I think i-concern kaSisi was that she didn't consent to being placed under debt review. I think that's where her issue was, which is something that we would need to discuss needed counselor ukuthi uwatholile na ama documents to verify whether both of the applicants actually bavumile ukuba under debt review. So there's certain documents that they need to provide to debt counselor in order for that to be done. That's something else that we would actually need to look into ukuthi kahle kahle kwenzakaleni ukuze abe under debt review, whereas yena akasayinanga any documents, if I heard her question correctly.
So ngalama fisha, since bashade in community of property, angakhona kuvuma noma ke ale ukuthi no angifuni ngena ku debt review?
Unfortunately, it's one estate, so what's mine is yours. Neikweleti zakho is so they both need to be under debt review if they are married in community of property.
Okay.
It's just a matter of consent.
Yeah. Okay. Siyabonga kakhulu ke kusinika lelo phuzu lelo. Let's take our next caller. Sinasizwe ulapha eMbombela. Sakumole hleleni sawubona. Hi Sizwe Mbombela, sakumole hleleni sawubona.
Yebo kunjani bakunqwana?
Siyaphila kunjani baba?
No go right man. Yeah, baba etlana ngisafuna ukubhekisa umbuto wami la kusesi lo wakwa NCR la. Kunomuntu lo wantshontsha i-ID yami, it was 2012 if I'm not mistaken. Then later on in 2018 bangifonela bangitshela ukuthi ucredit ngiyakolota ngithi mina 2012 bekade ngingasebenzi. Yabona. And leso sikoloto leso la manje ngiyasebenza mangabe ngithi ngiyovula ama-account, then leso sikoloto leso siya appear ukuthi mina ngaboleka imali, then mangifonele labantu labo bangitshela ukuthi ucredit lento leyo bayenda via telephonically. Ngathi mina ucredit nangithi ngicela bangisendelela ama-recordings abakhoni bangitshela ukuthi no leso sikoloto leso under ama-debt collectors, so angazi ukuthi ngingaphuma kanjani lapho.
Okay, Sizwe, siyabonga kakhulu kusishayela. Ukhona ke Matikwa, ngiyabona ukuvile. Now Matikwa, I'm sure you've heard i-concern yaSizwe ulapha eMbombela ukuthi ke bamtshontshela i-ID yakhe and nga 2012, and that's at that particular time bekangasebenzi, kepha nje a few years later bamfonela ema creditors bafuna imali takhe bathi yena wathatha i-loan. So how would you respond to that?
So firstly, it's a fraud case. So mele aqale phansi aye kumaphoyisa and then report ukuthi the ID was actually stolen, and then do in affidavit ukuthi yena i-ID yakhe was stolen and he did not actually have a job at that particular time, and then send it through to the credit providers. The credit providers would actually have to go and investigate ukuthi lama documents ebawatholile, is it the same person? Obviously, in terms of verifying ukuthi ID, even if you do a telephonic application, you still need to send through your proof of income and your ID. So they would need to check those type of things to verify ukuthi bekungasiwuye definitely. And also, he would need to send that information through to the credit bureau ukuthi nabo bakhona ukulista ukuthi lo muntu walahlekela i-ID, so that it doesn't happen in future. There will be more stringent measures. A credit application for whoever took the ID. Now, also it would affect him obviously when they actually have to do a credit application just to make sure to you niggas with ID.
Okay, asishiye lapho sitawuchubeka nenkulumo yethu emva kweli khefu ke Matikwa. Thank you so much for joining us. So now let's take a final ad break. Kungasanyakadi siyabuya khona nyana. Sasiqephu sesegcina ke kulolu hlelo ke namhla sikhuluma nge-debt review asesichubeke ngendzaba yethu ke. Now Neil, let's now break down the fees that are involved in the whole debt review program. What are the fees? How are they calculated? And is it a once-off payment or is it calculated on a case-by-case basis?
Yes, Simpiwe, the most important thing to understand around the fees is that it's prescribed by the National Credit Regulator, first of all, and secondly, it will always be affordable to everybody because depending on what you have available to pay towards your credit providers, that would determine the fees. So just quickly, the fees are broken up into a restructuring fee. That's a once-off fee that is paid towards the credit or the debt counselor, but that's included in your repayment plan. So you're not going to pay that in addition to anything else. You're going to get your repayment plan. In that repayment plan is going to be your restructuring fee, and that is an amount equal to what you're going to pay towards your credit providers, and that is capped at I think it's 8,400 Rand or something. It's capped on that amount, so it will never be more than that. Then you have to pay aftercare fees. That's an amount of 5% of the payment or the amount paid towards your credit providers. And that's also capped at, I think it's 400 Rand. And then there's also legal fees because you have to apply at an attorney or we apply on your behalf to make this a court order. But that's all worked into your repayment plan. So people do not have to worry about the payments. And it's all prescribed by the National Credit Regulator.
Okay, just final thoughts, your last words and words of advice for consumers?
When you find yourself in a situation where you are over indebted, and especially now with this difficult time that we have with COVID, know that there is help out there. The National Credit Act is a brilliant piece of legislation. It's the best of its kind in the world. Make use of it. It's there to help people. It's been streamlined over the last 13 years, and we need it now more than ever. So make use of it. Is help out there. Don't wait until it's too late.
All right. Thank you so much for your thoughts there, Neil Roots. We do appreciate your time. Now, Matikwa, just in closing, what are your words of advice? And umvile ke Roots lapha ukhuluma ngekuthi ema fees wona ke regulator ngini i-NCR. Nekuthi ke nifika njani ke kulawo ma fees? How are they calculated? Nekuthi ke are they on a case by case basis?
The fees are on a case-on-case basis. So we've kept the fees so which our consumers are be overcharged. We understand which our debt counselors still need to survive and make a living. So we've tried to make them reasonable based on data that has been collected over the years in terms of repayment. So they were based on that. So consumers just need to be aware of the fees and know which they can always come to the regulator should they feel which they're being overcharged. And very important is that a consumer need to know who the debt counselor is, check if the debt counselor is actually registered with the NCR, and be actively involved in the process. I would say and then even if but try to negotiate and I would show to 50 Rand somewhere. So it's very important to they see the process through. You have to pay until the end. And along the way, you can increase some payments work, or should you feel you've got more money available, to complain the process is taking too long, whereas you are always in control in terms of how you contribute towards the process.
Okay, Matikwa, siyabonga kakhulu ukukhuluma nasi ke namhla ke and sharing your thoughts and your insights of this matter. We do appreciate your time. Hayi ke mbukeli sesifika kanjalo ke maphethelweni ehlelo namhla. Sithanda ukubonga nini ke ukuhlanganyela nathi. Let me also thank our guests for making time to be with us. Hayi ke bekunele, this show will continue next week and Alicia Jali will bring you yet another live consumer topic of the week. From me, Simpiwe Ngongwane, and the rest of the team, thank you so much for watching. Do have a pleasant week. Bye-bye.
Yilungelo Lakho. awumelanga